Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're tackling a subject that's shrouded in mystery,
Hmm.
the library at Alexandria.
Oh yeah, legendary
Yeah,
place.
and it's a place that has captured the imaginations of people for centuries.
It really has this idea of, a treasure trove of ancient wisdom that's been lost to time.
Yeah, exactly. And today we're going to be diving deep into what we know about this legendary library.
Right.
We've got excerpts from a podcast episode with historians Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook.
Two brilliant minds.
Yeah, they really get into what we actually know about the library versus what's just, speculation and myth.
Which is a lot. There's a lot we don't know, but there's
Yeah.
also a lot we can piece together.
Yeah, definitely. And, before we get into Alexandria itself,
Okay.
I think it's important to remember that the idea of a library wasn't exactly brand new back
Wow.
then.
Right.
Other civilizations had already tried their hand at collecting and preserving knowledge.
Absolutely. The podcast actually mentions the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal,
Okay.
who ruled in the 7th century BC.
Wow.
And this guy had a massive library filled with thousands of clay tablets.
Really?
Everything from omens and spells to historical records and even literary works like the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Wow. So this is like the ancient world's version of a digital archive.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Except instead of hard drives, you've got clay tablets.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's fascinating about this is that Ashurbanipal wasn't just collecting these texts for fun.
Right.
He saw them as a source of power.
Mm.
By controlling knowledge, he could control his people and solidify his rule.
That's really interesting. It makes you wonder what it was been like to walk through those halls,
I know.
surrounded by all that ancient
It
wisdom.
must have been pretty awe-inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sets the stage for understanding why the Library of Alexandria, centuries later,
Right.
held such a powerful allure.
Yeah.
But to really grasp its significance, we need to talk about Alexandria itself and the man who built it, Alexander the Great.
Of course, Alexander the Great.
So picture this. It's 331 BC, and Alexander, at the height of his power,
Right.
decides to build a city on the Egyptian coast.
An ambitious endeavor.
And this wasn't just any city. It was a cosmopolitan hub designed to be a beacon of the Hellenistic world.
The Hellenistic world.
Yeah, so for our listeners,
Yeah.
the Hellenistic world refers to the periods from Alexander's conquests in the 4th century BC to the rise of the Roman Empire.
Right.
So it was a time when Greek culture and influence spread throughout the Mediterranean and beyond.
Precisely.
So Alexandria was kind of like a melting pot of ideas and cultures.
Yeah, a true crossroads.
All brought together under this Greek umbrella.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was a city of marvels.
Oh, yeah?
I mean, think about it. They had numbered addresses, automatic doors,
Really?
even something like slot machines.
Yeah.
It was a testament to human ingenuity and a symbol of the Hellenistic world's ambition.
Slot machines in ancient Egypt. That's
Yeah.
not something you hear every day.
It's mind-boggling.
Right. It just goes to show you how advanced and sophisticated this city was.
Mm-hmm.
And after Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy Soter took over
Right.
and really pushed for Alexandria to become a center of learning and scholarship.
Yeah, he was a patron of the arts and sciences.
And that's where the museum and the library come in.
Exactly.
Right.
This is where it gets really interesting.
So the museum, often compared to a modern research institute
Like a think tank.
or think tank, was a place where scholars from all over the Hellenistic world came to live, work, and debate.
Yeah, it was a hub of intellectual activity.
And it's believed to have been inspired by Aristotle's Lyceum in Athens.
Aristotle's Lyceum, a legendary institution.
Yeah, so imagine walking down the halls and bumping into some of the greatest minds of the ancient world.
I mean, can you imagine the conversation?
Talk about intellectual stimulation.
It must have been an incredible environment.
Yeah. Now, the exact relationship between the museum and the library is still debated.
That's right.
Was it a separate building or part of the museum complex?
That's a good question.
Yeah, the podcast mentions a theory that the library might not have been a separate building,
Okay.
but rather a collection of shelves and scrolls integrated within the museum itself.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and the Italian scholar Luciano Canfora
Oh, yes. Canfora.
actually argues that the ancient Greek word for library originally referred to the shelves themselves,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a standalone building.
So it's more about the collection than the physical space.
Right, so instead of picturing a grand, imposing structure.
Hmm.
You should maybe think of it as a more organic,
Okay.
decentralized system of knowledge sharing within the museum.
I like that that's a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
It challenges our modern perception of a library as a single monolithic building.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is getting really interesting.
Who did?
So if the library wasn't this grand standalone building, how big was it, really?
Right.
And did it really house all the world's knowledge, like the legends say?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's one that historians have been grappling with for centuries.
Yeah.
And while the library's ambition was undoubtedly vast, the podcasters argue that it wasn't quite the universal repository of knowledge that we often imagine.
Okay, so what did its collection actually look like?
Right.
Was it more focused on specific types of knowledge?
From what we can gather, the library primarily focused on Greek literature. The goal seems to have been to collect and create definitive editions of classic texts, like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey.
So while it was an impressive collection, it wasn't necessarily representative of all the world's knowledge.
Exactly. It reflects the biases and perspectives of its time,
Right.
prioritizing Greek knowledge and culture above others.
Okay, so we've busted the myth of the universal library.
It seems so.
But the question that's on everyone's mind is,
Yeah.
what happened to it?
Right.
Did Julius Caesar really burn it down?
No. That's the popular story, right?
Yes.
Caesar sets fire to the harbor in Alexandria, and the flames accidentally spread to the library,
Right.
destroying this priceless collection of knowledge.
But is that really what happened?
Well, the podcasters actually point out that the evidence is a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Well, Caesar did set fire to ships in the harbor during his conflict with Cleopatra's brother,
Right.
and some warehouses containing scrolls were likely damaged. There's no definitive proof that the entire library went up in flames during this incident.
So maybe not a complete and utter destruction, but still a pretty devastating loss, right?
Absolutely. A significant loss for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that several historical sources indicate the library was still functioning well into the Roman period.
Oh, really?
In fact, the Roman Emperor Domitian even sent scribes to Alexandria to copy texts
Wow.
that had been lost in fires in Rome.
Wait, so if the library was supposedly destroyed by Caesar, how could it still be a resource for replacing lost Roman texts centuries later?
Exactly. It suggests that the library wasn't completely wiped out in that single event.
Right?
It might have suffered damage, but it clearly continued to exist in some form.
Okay, so if not Caesar, then who or what was responsible for the library's ultimate demise?
Yeah, that's the question that has fascinated historians for centuries.
Was it a slow decline or another catastrophic event?
And the answer, as is often the case with history, is probably more complicated than a single villain or event.
So are we talking about a combination of factors that led to the library's decline?
Precisely to understand how the library might have disappeared, we need to consider the challenges of preserving knowledge in the ancient world.
Okay.
And one of the biggest factors was the fragility of papyrus.
Oh, right. Papyrus, the main writing material back then.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not exactly known for its durability, is it?
Not at all. It's susceptible to humidity,
Yeah.
insects, fire, and even just frequent handling.
Right.
Imagine trying to preserve a vast collection of papyrus scrolls in a city like Alexandria, which was known for its heat and humidity. It would have been a constant battle against deterioration.
I can only imagine the army of scribes they must have needed just to keep copying and repairing those scrolls.
Absolutely. But even with meticulous care, papyrus is still a fragile medium.
Right.
And then you have to factor in the political realities of Alexandria. It wasn't exactly a peaceful paradise.
Right. The podcast mentioned that Alexandria was actually quite a volatile city prone to riots and uprisings.
Exactly. Over the centuries, Alexandria suffered through periods of political turmoil, civil war, and even attacks from outside forces.
Wow.
Any one of these events could have resulted in damage or destruction to parts of the library's collection.
So it's less about a single dramatic event that wiped out the library and more about a gradual process of decline, right? A death by a thousand cuts, so to speak.
That's a very apt analogy. Scrolls could have been lost to neglect, fire theft, or simply the natural process of decay.
Right.
And this process could have played out over centuries, making it difficult to pinpoint a precise moment when the library ceased to exist.
This is really giving me a new perspective on the whole story.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
But I have to ask, what about the theories that blame specific groups for the library's destruction, like the Christians, for example?
Ah, yes. The idea that Christians deliberately targeted the library during the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire.
Right.
It's a persistent narrative, but the podcasters point out that there's little evidence to support it.
So no dramatic scene of Christian mobs storming the library and burning everything in sight.
Not quite. While it's true that a Christian mob destroyed the Serapeum, a temple complex in Alexandria dedicated to the god Serapis in 391 AD,
Okay.
none of the historical accounts mention the destruction of a library within the Serapeum.
Okay, so another myth debunked. But what about the Muslims?
Okay.
Didn't they conquer Alexandria in the 7th century?
They did.
Surely they must have had something to do with the library's disappearance.
That's another popular theory. There's a story about the Muslim Caliph Omar ordering the destruction of the library's contents because, according to him, they either agreed with the Quran or were unnecessary.
Wow.
However, historians generally dismiss this account as a later fabrication.
It seems like every group throughout history gets blamed for the library's destruction at some point.
It speaks to the enduring power of the library as a symbol. Its loss is so profound that people feel compelled to find a dramatic explanation.
Yeah.
A single villain to blame, but as we've seen, the reality is probably much more complex and nuanced.
It's almost like a historical murder mystery with everyone trying to find the culprit. But the real answer might just be a slow, natural decline.
Exactly, and that, I think, is one of the most fascinating takeaways from this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
The Library of Alexandria, this symbol of knowledge and wisdom, might have met its end not in a blaze of glory,
Right.
but in a gradual, almost imperceptible fade into obscurity.
It's a bit sad in a way, isn't it, to think that something so grand and influential could simply slip away like that.
It is, but it also highlights the fragility of knowledge itself. Even in the ancient world, preserving information was a constant struggle. Yeah, against both human actions and the forces of nature.
Right.
And as we've seen, even the most ambitious attempts to collect and safeguard knowledge can be vulnerable to the ravages of time.
Yeah, it really does make you think, about the challenges of preserving knowledge, both in the past and in our own time. I mean, we live in the digital age where information is, constantly being created and shared at an incredible pace. But does that mean it's automatically safer?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that the historians we're following actually touch on.
Yeah.
They argue that the Library of Alexandria's legacy isn't just about the physical loss of scrolls, but about the enduring power of the idea itself, this quest to collect and preserve human knowledge.
So even though the library's physical structure is gone, the concept of a universal repository of knowledge still resonates with us today.
I think so. I think it speaks to something very fundamental about human nature, this desire to gather and understand the world around us.
It makes you wonder, what would a library of Alexandria for the 21st century look like? Would it be a physical, building a massive digital archive, or, something else entirely?
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it?
Yeah, if we could build a modern-day Library of Alexandria, what would we prioritize, and how would we ensure its survival for future generations, given the challenges of preserving digital information?
Right, because we face different challenges today.
Yeah.
Think data breaches, server failures, obsolete file formats. Could these lead to a new kind of lost library in the future?
It's a bit unsettling to think about. We often assume that digital information is permanent and easily accessible, but as we've learned from the Library of Alexandria, things can be lost or become inaccessible much more easily than we might think.
That's right. It's a reminder that, the pursuit and preservation of knowledge is an ongoing challenge, one that requires vigilance, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of the technologies and systems we use to store and share information.
I think we almost need like a new generation of librarians, archivists, and curators, for the digital age. People who understand both the power and the fragility of knowledge in all its forms.
I think you're absolutely right. We need individuals who can help us navigate this vast and ever-expanding ocean of information, ensuring that, valuable knowledge is preserved, organized, and accessible for generations to come.
Well, this deep dive into the Library of Alexandria has been both fascinating and thought-provoking.
Yeah, it has.
We started out exploring the myths and legends surrounding this ancient institution, and we ended up contemplating the challenges of preserving knowledge in our own digital age.
It just goes to show you that history has a way of offering valuable insights into contemporary issues.
Right.
And the story of the Library of Alexandria, even though it took place centuries ago, still resonates with us today, reminding us of the importance of knowledge, the challenges of preservation, and the enduring human quest to understand our world.
I think it's safe to say that this deep dive has definitely expanded my understanding of the Library of Alexandria and its legacy. and it's left me with a renewed appreciation for the work of those who dedicate themselves to preserving knowledge, both past and present.
Absolutely, and I hope it's encouraged our listeners to think about the ways in which knowledge is created, shared, and preserved in their own lives. What information do you value? How do you ensure its survival? These are questions worth considering in our increasingly digital world.
Well said, and on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating topic with you.
And to all our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What knowledge do you think is most important to preserve today? Head over to our website or social media and let us know.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of knowledge.
See you on the next deep dive.